Afternoon all. Okay, let's have a look at the clash of the titans. The two 22-year-olds, both born in 1990, super grandmasters, ranked 1 and ranked 6 in the world currently. Magnus Carlsen as white, Sergey Karjakin as black, Carlsen 2837 on the FIDE list at the moment, and Sergey is 2779, Sergey Karjakin. So E4 was played by Magnus. We have, after E5, knight F3 chosen. A solid start, just attacking that E5 pawn, no King's Gambit or other stuff. Even though it's a rapid game, it's 15 minutes, 10-second increment. The openings look like our normal time control at the moment. No major surprises. Bishop B5. But after knight F6, a slightly offbeat move, I think, is played here. D4, which presents immediate problems for black. Okay, what does black want to do here? Well, Sergey reacted with E takes D4, and now not an immediate knight takes D4, but just castling. Okay, and now A6 from black. So after bishop takes, D takes, does white really want an exchange of queens with queen takes D4, or does he risk trying to, keep the tension with knight takes D4, but with the knight being a target on D4? He plays knight takes D4, Magnus, and after bishop C5, white decides to play C3 here. Okay, if the knight moves, then obviously the exchange of queens might not be that brilliant, especially with knight takes E4 on the cards as well. With the bishop pointing at F2, it might not be that great. So C3, and now after castling, F3 by Magnus. Okay, so a slightly odd looking position. You might think at first sight, well, is black doing well here? Because, okay, there's some weaknesses here. This knight hasn't got its ideal square. Where is this knight going to route to here? But this bishop looks as though it's got a nice pin opportunity with the bishop stuck on C5. Okay, knight D7 actually takes away the pin possibility. And black is aiming perhaps to use that E5 square now. Bishop E3. Okay, and now slightly loose piece is created by black's next move. Knight E5. C5 bishop, these are both loose at the moment, but they're not exploitable because white has a liability on this diagonal. He can't do anything clever at the moment tactically. He just reinforces his bishop actually, and black protects both pieces. Now queen E7. So both queens in the centre, ready for action on either side of the board. Knight D2, and now F6 from black. White really doesn't want to rush in with F4 to weaken that E4 pawn. He actually plays King H1, which looks like a safe prophylactic kind of move against any dangers. Bishop D6, which seems to eye H2. Okay, but the other point is that C5 is now possible. In fact, after Rook A1, C5 is played here. Okay. Magnus now goes for the light square bishop with knight F5, not minding double pawns. And Sergey accepts that, and he plays bishop takes F5. E takes F5. Okay, but there's no light square bishop, which might make things more unpleasant for black. Unfortunately for black, though, this bishop doesn't look too good. The double pawns may be a liability as well. Queen D7, attacking that pawn. How is it going to be protected? Does it need to be protected? Well, for the moment, actually, F4, kicking the knight, and now it's actually protected quite radically with G4. Okay, so potentially weakening this diagonal, but at the moment it seems to be of no great consequence. White can play Queen F3 to cover up those light square weaknesses. Rook Fe8, pinning. Queen F3 not only unpinning, but securing the king on this diagonal. And also, B7. Is black going to do something about B7? Okay, but black just plays actually bishop F8. In fact, it seems that if queen takes B7, maybe just rook takes E3 here would be a strong move, with queen takes D2 coming next. Magnus actually plays knight E4, okay, which looks as though it's supporting in the future G5, but at the moment, queen takes F5 needs to be factored in. Okay, knight E4, queen D3 is played here. Attacking that knight, because the rook's already pressurising the knight. Knight f2 kicking the queen, queen b5, as though b2 might be an option to take on b2. But is black really serious? Is this quite provocative? Because here it seems this is a dangerous possibility to allow g5 and stripping open this g file. I mean, the king's also sidestepped to h1, allowing rook g1 in one move. So is this a danger level being created for black here? Magnus doesn't bother moving the pawn or protecting it. Okay, he just plays, in fact, the move g5 here. Now let's have a look. From an engine point of view, would an engine have done something about the pawn or gone for the king here? Interesting. Actually, the engine likes g5 as well. If you try and protect the pawn, say with rook e2, actually technically, from an engine point of view, black's a tiny bit better here. With rook ad8 or knight d6, it looks as though engines like the position. So actually it seems in this position g5 is a good try, even from a theoretical point of view at this certain depth. It seems a good try to try and weaken black's king. So offering up the b2 pawn, g takes, and there are clear problems to solve here now. Now if black plays g takes f6, I expect the black king to be beaten up. Instead, Sergey took on c3, which kind of adds support. I keep doing that today. It adds support for this diagonal and g7. If he had played g takes f6, well, let's have a quick look. It seems intuitively that check and knight e4 is going to be dangerous. But let's have a quick look at this position. In fact, knight e4 here, okay, is seemingly a strong move. Well, both of them actually. Knight e4, and if black doesn't take on e4, well, it seems like big trouble. Say bishop g7. I think let's go for the rook g1. Maybe rook g7 is possible. No, it's not mentioned. Queen h5, and now storm's brewing here. So let's imagine rook takes e4 to see the storm in full effect. Queen takes f7. Nope. Mate in 7 there. Rook g8, queen f7. It looks as though this is a huge, actually huge advantage for white. I think, for example, knight h6, rook takes g7, and it's quite crushing. So this looks to be too dangerous, this position. Okay, so Sergey did the right thing to take on c3. So he's kind of protecting his king after fg, bishop takes g7, rook g1. Okay, king h8. And also, as well as protecting g7, there's pressure, of course, on e3. But for the moment, this is ignored now with queen takes b7. If the rook dares to come off, there's queen takes a8. Okay, so this is also split black's pawns here. So we've got a very dynamic pawn structure indeed. Double pawns there, double pawns for black, isolate pawns for both of them on the a pawn, isolated on the h pawn. Okay, it's a funny pawn structure. So it's gone to be, it's very, very tactical position here. Black gains a tempo with knight d6. Okay, queen d5 keeps an eye on that a8 rook. So if rook e3, there's queen takes a8. But knight takes f5 now, trying to decoy the queen to f5, maybe to take on e3. But white plays instead bishop takes c5. And now we have, after rook ad8, a couple of rooks coming off. Knight d3, which, okay, it centralizes and it gives the possibility now of knight e5. And it's also, of course, threatening, after knight d3, there's a threat of queen takes f5, it would seem. In this position, okay, queen takes f5 would be answerable by, I guess, queen f3 and then mating. That would be embarrassing to be avoided. So knight d3 shields the f3 square as well, away from this check. So f5 is on at the moment. The queen goes to protect the f5 knight. And now it's kind of attacked again with rook g5. Okay, and actually this is made into another exchange with rook d8. So after this, queen takes f5 and we get an endgame position, which is interesting. Okay, can white really grind a win out of this? Now, I know in the post-game interview, Sergey was living basically on the increment at some point. White has got the rook on the 7th now, with a pawn to gain tempo on, and the king's kind of awkward at the moment. Check. But you could argue now black has also got a rook on the 7th. So what's the big deal? In fact, black is the first to snatch a pawn and be a pawn up in this position. Rook takes c7. Well, it seems white still has the advantage here because there's a threat now of rook c8. And these pawns, okay, the king's next to this pawn. So this is an interesting endgame scenario in its own right now. Remember though, it's a rapid game, but with 10-second increments, so they can get to play endgames on the increment without too much severe time pressure with the risk of losing on time immediately. So what does Sergey do here? It's a tricky position. He's threatened with rook c8. He has to do something about that. He plays king g8. h4, and this pawn is quite dangerous here. It's always got the option to be a real nuisance. Rook c2, pinning, which seems to be a very dangerous move as well. Check. Now king e4, bringing the king in. So the king has got the advantage over the black king, being more aggressive. It can crawl onto this light square without being harassed, it would seem. After check, it goes onto that light square. Okay, so white's got a luxury of being shielded by this bishop actually for these checks, which could be a nuisance, in conjunction with this pawn coming up the board. So there's some real practical difficulties to solve here for black. Black now tries bishop d4, forcing white to do something now. So check, and now bishop d6. Okay, rook c6. The bishop has to keep protecting that rook for the moment. Rook d8, and then we see bishop c5, which gives white another slight advantage, a very central bishop on e5, striking in all directions. So the piece quality of white is still quite high, and this is still quite a danger. King f7, and now rook on the 7th again, bishop e7, and now putting on the pressure even more with h5. Okay, the rook, it seems, has to guard against bishop d6, so maybe has to stay on this rank for a bit or do something else. He does something else. He plays king e8, attacking the rook, rook a7. But again, you know, king e6 might be dangerous at some point, but h6 might also be dangerous. We have rook h6, so keeping that kind of force field against the white king entering. And what to do about this pawn? Well, actually, in this position, Magnus plays a nice move. I wonder if you can spot it here. It is a key move, it seems, to really put pressure on black with the h pawn. So I know some of you are interested in endgames, especially for blitz, which is very difficult. Remember, this is with increment, 10-second move. So what would you play here with white if I set you as a challenge here in this endgame? You want to try and grind out a win from this position. I think there's a very, very good move played. So 10 seconds starting from now, what would you play? Okay. Bishop g7, offering a pawn sacrifice to increase the quality of the king. If the king can go here, there's menacing threats. Okay, Sergey declines that. He plays rook c6. Let's just engine check that to be absolutely convinced. If rook takes h5, I think it's a total disaster. King e6, we've gone to +4, +5 then. Bishop d8. Now rook f7 here is very strong, threatening rook f8. So mating nets in the endgame are key. And black would be giving up a piece here to stave off rook f8. Isn't that coincidental that the bishop is attacking those two squares. Now rook f5 looks desperate, giving up rook. You just take with the rook. So that's totally gone after rook f7. So that's a very key tactical move. Okay, so let's go back. Whoops, we seem to have lost our position, pardon me. So we've got to the position of bishop g7, so the rook stays there on the 6th. But now, unfortunately, the bishop's also supporting h6. So now, there's a torture plan of trying to get this pawn. You know, if this pawn can be rounded up, that's going to be really dangerous. King f7, king e4, king e8, check, and he's going for the pawn now. Okay, if king g6, unfortunately there's f5 check, so white's going to be winning that pawn. Check, check, bishop e5, and again what to do about the pawn. So Sergey is being ground down here, it seems. Bishop f8, check, check, and the final blunder is coming up. After king f7, it's not because, okay, this next move is crushing. I wonder if you can spot it, and the reason why, the exact reason why, if I give you 10 seconds here, starting from now. Okay, it's a forcing move. Rook takes f8, and it's not to do with bishop d6. That's pinned to the king. It's pinned. It's to do with h7. Queening. Queening one of the pawns anyway. So say black tries rook takes, then takes here. You just play e6, and there's no way the black king, and that's not going to be a Superman, is it? So that's winning. Okay, very hard to defend that endgame if you're living off the 10-second increments. So let's have a look at that game again. So Magnus was doing extremely well in this tournament and was overtaken only in the last day, the 3rd day of the tournament, by Sergey. And this was their encounter. So a very interesting tactical game. And it just shows actually grandmasters can go, well, especially in rapid, for extremely dynamic pawn structures. Look how dynamic the pawn structure became for both sides here. Double pawns everywhere soon. After g5, yes, it strips open lines, but it's fracturing pawns even more, white's own pawns. Black's pawns also are allowed to be fractured because of the benefits that would bring for dynamic play, exchanging off stuff. But Magnus was able to convert quite a few endgames in this tournament, actually. So this was a magnificent kind of grind. The squeeze, the pressure, the delicacy of it is attractive in its own right. White kind of, you know, having these luxury options of all these checks and this pawn to bring up at the most effective possible point to bring up this pawn tactically, either to be used as a pawn sacrifice at some point or to sort of lock down the h7 pawn at some point and try and round up h7, as this showed. Bishop g7 creates that lockdown on the h7 pawn now with h6. So that h7 pawn's ripe for rounding up, and it starts to be really, really difficult for black. So he blundered here. Now, if we look technically, I think that I think it was mentioned it might have not have been totally winning here, but maybe it is. Let's just get a quick engine check. So rook h8, I think it might have been a key blunder. Check. Rook c4 might not have been the best, actually. So let's go with bishop f6 here. And we've got a position, say takes, then king g6. So that's looking like a draw now from an engine point of view. Okay, so bishop f6, potential improvement here, because of the idea of king g6. And if taking here, letting that pawn go here, now the check, now king g6, I'd say rook h8, rook c1. This could be tricky for white. Maybe technically it's drawn. It's one of those drawn rook and pawn endings. For example, h7, k1. It could be difficult for white to make progress. Okay. So the engine is looking 21 moves ahead and is not giving much of an advantage. So maybe there was a key blunder there in time pressure for rook c4 check. So this gave this king infiltration, which actually makes taking the h7 much more effective without any king g6s. The king's doing a wonderful job of restricting the black king here. Still restricting that black king, so getting that opposition. In fact, is like basically another way of saying, you know, really restricting the king. All those three key squares for rook takes h7, and it's very dangerous now for black. Lost now with this option of rook takes f8 and h7. That pawn just dangerously close to queening once it came up to h6. Okay, hope you got something out of that. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.